Hi, my name is CJ and this is my RC channel. Now we've got to work with this little guy here, and that's this section here. We're going to be setting up this. It's kind of like a traction plate. It's provides it's a friction damper kind of setup, and what it does is it you can see how the rear end here, you know, rocks around and whatnot, and it's very springy. This will slow that down. It's basically gonna you're gonna have this carbon fiber plate attached back here, and then on here, on this bolt that was sticking up, or is sticking up, that we weren't sure what, you know, where that was gonna come into play, that's gonna hold two discs. And there may be like a friction pad on those, or it may just be lubricated, and they will have springs above and below that are going to clamp against this plate here, so that this plate can move around, and those plates kind of provide a damping and smoothing action to the movement of the rear engine block. So let's start by gathering the parts we need for that. I'm going to go ahead and pause the video. Okay, so we start by taking the friction plate, and the top is the side with the countersinks. So from below, we're going to put in this 3x8 button head, and we are going to screw on this this ball connector nut. And this is probably going to be one of the attachment points for our shock absorber, the rearmost attachment point. And this handy little wrench they provide, and I don't mean that facetiously, it has been very handy. So that's tight. Okay, now we have this aluminum piece which is going to slide down over here, and it just rides on that. It doesn't move around. I mean, it might move a little bit up or down, but there's no anchoring it, and it just sits there. This is just a post to keep it oriented, as it were. So we are going to take one of these two silver springs that we found in our suspension stuff, and we're going to put one on there, and then we're going to take our two friction pads, or slipper pads, or however you want to describe them. There are two totally flat sides, and there are two sides that have a raised rim and a little socket. The socket faces down for the first one and up for the second. Now we are going to take some diff grease, which is what they want us to use, and we're going to rub diff grease on the smooth sides of both of these. I wouldn't use a lot. It's not going to take much. We don't want to just have something collecting dust. In fact, with the amount that I got on there, I can probably just rub one against the other like that and pull them apart and have enough on there. And that may be something that you play with for tuning, is how much you put on there. Also, there are different springs that can be used, and then there's how much tension you put on those springs. Now we drop on our second spring, and we put on our cap. And our default setting is 4 millimeters. So I'm going to screw that a little tighter. Okay, 4mm. So this, see how that it kind of it resists a lot actually with that diff grease on there, because that diff grease is really sticky. That really provides some nice damping. So now we can just set this assembly right down on top there and slide the plate forward, line up our 2 holes back here. Sorry guys, I'm a lefty. I'm gonna have to do it like that. I'll go back and fully tighten the first one after I just loosen that a little bit. There we go. So as you can see, there's how that action works there. And this is the front mount for our shock. So our shock is going to go in between these, and it's going to provide even more damping and even more spring. So there's a lot of spring and a lot of damping going on. We have the spring action of this bottom T-plate here that is a spring all on its own. Then we're going to have the shock absorber with its spring. We've got the damping of this, and I think that's mainly for handling left to right damping. And then we've got the damping of the shock absorber itself with its, oil-filled piston that is also going to provide damping in this direction. So there's a lot of tuning options there. So now it is time to assemble our shock absorber. And yes, I had this already put together, and I have taken it apart to show you how it goes together. I didn't have it quite filled with oil yet. I was about that moment when I realized that the camera wasn't doing what it was supposed to do. So this is an associated product called Green Slime. It's team associated. It's part number 1105. There's a few other companies I think also make a similar product by the same name, Green Slime. And this is a wonderful product for the seals in your shock absorbers, your O-rings. It is designed to prevent the O-rings from swelling and binding on the shock shaft and providing general lubrication. It's kind of like a conditioner for O-rings. And so the first thing is we put our seal into that hole, and we follow that. Let me just go ahead and set these pieces out here. We have a 2mm spacer that goes next in our assembly order. And then we have this little plastic cap here, and it's got a little raised rim that needs to go facing up, the flat side down, and that allows for that little rim there fits inside the hole in this cap. So now we're going to thread this cap on, but we're not going to do it all the way. We just want to let it touch down, and because we don't want to apply any pressure to that O-ring, because then it'll you know, it'll compress it, and it'll make the hole in the O-ring close up a little bit, and it makes it a lot easier to damage that O-ring as you're sliding the piston in. Now I'm also going to put some green slime on these threads, which will get some of it wiped off as it's inserted, and the rest of it will get cleaned off later. To put on your piston, you want to put an O-ring down below. There's two grooves for O-rings. You pop in the first O-ring, you put your piston down on top, and then you pop in the next O-ring. So now we can insert this into the bottom of the shock. Be very gentle with it. You don't want to scratch or mar that O-ring or tear it, even worse. Just gonna clean this up a little bit. And now we can tighten that cap, and tighten it as hard as you can, finger tight. I'd also recommend buying a larger tube of Tamiya's ball diff grease, since you're going to be rebuilding your differential from time to time, and you're going to be changing this piece and or cleaning it from time to time. You're going to want more of this. They sell it in a fairly decent sized tube for $5 or $6 on Tamiya USA. Okay, so this is our shock adjuster. This allows us to preload the spring, and there's a big groove in there, and we need to take this O-ring and just work it on in. There we go. And what that does is it makes it difficult to turn this as you thread it up here, which means that this can't unwind or wind up on its own. So be careful as you start this. You do not want to cross thread this. If you do, you will, if you feel it start to bind at all, back it off, pull it out, slide it back in, try to feel it go past the O-ring, and then if you need to, rotate backwards once or twice, and then start coming forward until you catch threads. Once you do, you can go ahead and tighten that on up. And just want to run this up to the top of the shock, because there's no need to do any initial preload. I'm sorry, I hope I wasn't, I didn't have that off camera. Okay, I'm going to review this footage and see what I've shown you and not shown you. Okay, so it looks like the only thing that I was doing outside of the view of the camera was showing you, was starting to screw this on, and my description of that process is far more important than watching me screw this piece on. That doesn't tell you much at all in this actual case. Now, if you notice, there's a notch here in this adjuster ring, and that is, there's no mechanical purpose. It is a very important visual aid, though. A lot of times when you're adjusting preload, you'll do that by turns. So, you know, add 3 turns, and then, you know, make a note that you've added 3 turns of preload, or a half a turn, or 6 turns, or however much, to try to, you know, change the setting and then see what happens. You want to be able to write down changes like that so you can back them out. Well, to make a change like that, you have to know that you've made X number of turns. Having this groove here shows you there's only one, and so it's like a broken clock. You know, you just wind that sucker around, and you've got your indicator of how far you've turned it. So, you know, that's 1 turn, and then you could back out 1 turn, and you're set. You know, you can accurately repeat that process. So now we need to add the bottom eyelet to the shock shaft. You really want a set of shock pliers for this process. You could take a wire cutter, like a diagonal cutter, and grab just above the threads and hold it firmly. You do not want to grab the shock shaft. They show like a pair of needle nose pliers with, I don't know, some tape or something, a piece of paper. I would not do that at all. You could damage the shock shaft and then you don't get good performance, and there's not much shaft there, you know. It's fairly short, so there's only so much movement that you're gonna have to deal with there. So if you damage the shock shaft surface up here, it's gonna leak. Basically, that seal isn't gonna hold. So a shock pliers has round, smooth cuts in it that allow you to clamp the shock shaft without doing any damage to it. And now we can screw this on, and we're either going to screw until we run out of threads or until we bottom out. So in other words, if we don't see any more threads up there, we get up to the base and just screw it until it stops. Don't try to push it through, or you could deform that that surface where this is going to snap onto one of these ball nuts. So okay, one shock absorber, mostly built. Now we need to fill it with shock fluid. This is a incredibly handy item. Definitely you should have something that does this function for you. Oops. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and use their damper oil. I wonder, I saw a little descriptor in here about the oil weight. Yeah, they've got it in numbers or pounds. I guess, see, all of mine are done by weight. They're double digits, like 15, 30, 32, whatever. I'm going to need to, at some point, build this with my own shock fluid. Just like pick a number at random somewhere in the middle of the range and then experiment, or maybe I can find a conversion for this. This is, let's see, and it doesn't tell me, it just says Tamiya damper oil. Wonderful. Okay, let me see if I can line up these. Let's see. Now it says 99 cc, 0.9 cc's. That doesn't help me. And the Japanese characters I'm seeing here don't really help me either. Actually, I can't find a comparison on this chart. I mean, I can assume it's the yellow because of its color, which would make it in the soft, the high end of the soft range, number 400 or 400 pound, or however they measure their shock lube. Okay, so what you want to do is start by filling this not quite to the top, and you want to exercise the shock. In other words, you want to slowly push the piston up and then pull it down firmly, and you're going to see a lot of bubbles pop up. Okay, and go ahead and add a little more. I'm going to add a little more fluid here, get it a little closer to full, and I'm going to do that again. And what you're doing is you're getting all the air out from under the piston. This is very important on new builds, that you fully do that. Okay, I think that's good. I didn't see any new air coming out that time. So now we're going to wait for a little while, and let all the little bubbles that are in the fluid rise to the surface. So there's no more bubbles, and this is a type of shock absorber I've not used as much. Usually I use emulsion type of shocks that will have a hole in the cap with a seal. Basically just I'm wrapping this cloth around here at the very top just to catch any overflow so it doesn't run onto the threads. This is a little air bladder that we put into the top of this shock carefully. Just press it down and let the extra run off over the top. Okay, then we have this piece, which is V9, that goes into our cap and gives us our eyelet at the top. And now I can kind of roll back the cloth here and gently set that on top. And screw this down. And sorry if you're not seeing that. Again, there's only so much to see. Tighten it down as far as it will go until it stops. Okay, now we've got a little bit of bounce back, which is a good thing. And if you push hard on it or pull on it, you feel the damping action. It basically slows things down. This is a damper. It is not a shock absorber yet until we add a spring to it. Then it becomes a full shock absorber assembly. This right now is just an oil damper. The idea is just to slow the reaction of that spring. So a spring on its own will bounce when it goes over a bump. It's going to go over the bump and it's going to bounce, bounce, bounce. If you have a damper on there, it prevents that bouncing action. So now we take this little guy right here, which is V3, and basically slide it under the spring, and it comes over there like that. So now, as you can see, our spring is not long enough, as it were, but it's fine. What we need to do now is adjust our preload adjuster. I'm not sure that I really like it the way it is like that. That kind of, let's see how that reaches. Yeah, see, something's not quite right here. Do we need a spacer under the piston? They don't show one in that diagram. And they don't show one in this diagram either. Maybe they're expecting a certain amount of preload out of the chassis itself. I mean, the eyelet is screwed onto the shaft as far as it can go. Let's go ahead and kind of check this out a bit. Okay, so if that was snapped on there, and then this was compressed a bit to snap on there, that's already bowing up the chassis. So we would have to unload that spring and let it compress, but that means the spring's going to have like this, I don't know, that's weird. So let's say I adjust that. Until we're on the spring like that. Okay, let's see if there's a like a thinner and easier side and a harder side to go in on these. Can't really tell. They look the same from left to right. Okay, I'll close this up before I get shock oil everywhere. It's weird the way that's set up. Now there is a lot of weight that goes into this once we have a motor, battery, ESC, and receiver. So I'm just going to have to trust in them for the moment. I'm going to go ahead and leave that where it is as far as its adjustment. And let's see. Yeah, there's nothing else that I could do. The only thing that could be done would be, you know, as far as shortening this shock up, would be to put a spacer, you know, like get a couple of spacers, like those little 2mm spacers, or the ones that go up under the kingpins here, and put them underneath the piston so that limit the travel of the piston. But I'm not sure there's an upside to that. I guess this just, you know, is going to ride on that, you know, kind of like a cushion. So let's see where we are from here. They've got us gluing tires. Are there any more mechanical, yeah, attaching, you know, putting the front wheels on? This is where they mentioned those little spacers. That's a 1/2 millimeter thick spacer. And then they demonstrate how to clamp the battery. I'm gonna go ahead and cut that part off. And you're going to find a lot of parts on these parts trees that we are not using because they are part of the old design. So don't be alarmed when you see, you know, pieces like this and this and this that look like they're part of some type of damping system, because they were part of the old damper. The original kit did not have this full upper deck. It had like a partial deck, and it had something similar to this, but it also had there's this type of damper tubes that you'll find on pan cars and on some of the F1 cars, old and new. Some of the new F1 models still use damper tubes, and basically it's like two tubes that are fairly, you know, a tube with a rod that's in it that has a few rings cut into it, and you use different thicknesses of grease, and as you slide, you know, one tube, the rod into the tube and back out again, it provides damping, and that's when a lot of the spring action, instead of being on a shock, is coming from the T-plate. So you'll have like these damper tubes at diagonal angles in the rear of the chassis, sometimes facing forwards, and that dampens the action of the rear end in its desire to twist left and right like this, and in its desire to flex up and down. So basically we're gonna rock these pieces over to the side, slide our battery in, swing them back into place as we're moving the front of the battery under here, and then this plate is slid down in here let's see. Yeah, basically you just slide it down into here and lock it somehow. That's weird, doesn't want to go all the way down. Maybe I'm not pushing it hard enough. Ah, I see. There we go. It doesn't have to be hard at all. There's these holes right here. These little rounded barrel-shaped parts, those are going to go into those two round holes, and these slots, you're going to anchor this down with a pair of body pins. And that will clamp over the wires coming out of the center of the battery pack, and that stabilizes the battery pack in the chassis. In fact, I got one right here. I might as well demonstrate. So, let me zoom out a little bit. So these T-plates, or these pieces rotate, the battery pack goes in, slides back, and then this piece drops in from above, clamping the wires. Supposedly. Is that all the way back? Yes, it is. Okay, I may need to trim these edges right here because they are catching on the edge of the battery pack. If you can see in there. Maybe it's just the length of this battery pack, the plastic wrapping material, but yeah, that needs to just be trimmed to allow this to catch on there. I'm going to try that with this cutter right here. Just going to take off a little bit. As you can see, I'm just nibbling a piece of it. Okay, that I may need to remove a little bit more. Okay, one more try. Should do it. Yeah, that's going to allow a pin to pass through there, and firmly clamp that battery pack in place. And that doesn't not move at all. So, perfect. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and leave that in for the moment because I am going to, it's time to start deciding where I want to mount various pieces of electronics and then body. So, let me find those pins I was looking, there we go. It is amazing how many extra screws, ball sockets. I'd really like to know where these little suckers go. I'm going to look around. This is for the motor plate. These bearings are for the front wheels, which I will not be using. I'm going to be replacing those with carbon fiber. I mean, with the ceramic bearings. So those can just go in there. And these are the body pins that go for this. So let's push that down. Slide in a pin. There we go. So that is, battery is firmly in place. Our little body pieces are just fine for mounting our electronics. And There's our suspension action. So looking good so far. Okay. Just for giggles, I'm going to go ahead and put a set of wheels and tires on here that I've got that are already mounted. These are made by Aeromax. These are the rear wheels. I pulled off the wedding ring because it was starting to hurt my hand. I got pretty good arthritis in this hand here. Show you Aeromax high performance RC racing tires, 110 F1 tire rim, front medium, that refers to the compound, glued to, made in Korea. Now with F1s, your front wheel bearings need to be pressed into the wheel each time. So if you switch wheels, you take the bearings out, put them into the new wheel. They're not mounted into the hub as a lot of cars are. A lot of two-wheel drive vehicles, the bearings are actually in the wheels. Just depends. They don't require a lot of effort to press them in. Now remember not to let that spacer get away from you. That is an essential item. You see, if you put a bearing up against this plastic part here, some of the like the seal might make contact with that and rub, and you wouldn't want that. So having this little bit of a spacer there, it's just a 1/2 millimeter, that makes sure that just this inner rim of the bearing makes contact. Now, unlike the rear, you don't hold the wheel, you hold the car to tighten that down. Look at that, just keep rolling and rolling. I didn't even do that hard. That's the difference that ceramic bearings make. Okay, so if we just push down, there's our suspension action there, and here's our suspension action up here. So I'm going to tuck that balance cable in there, and I'm going to have to figure out how I'm going to run these wires. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this work stand. And now it's time for motor and electronic speed controller, and then receiver. One of the reasons I went with this Hobby Wing kit is that I already have a Hobby Wing programming box, and this will work for any of their electronic speed controls, which is also why I bought one for my all-wheel drive truck, short course truck. I wanted something to run in the modified truck class, which is a road class. People basically take, in fact, almost everybody there is running a Slash 4x4 and assorted modifications to it, and that's exactly what I'm doing. I picked up a Slash and a 3660 motor kit for it, and I'll be doing a video on that as well, because that is a really fun class. But it's kind of like a mad scientist class of, you know, you do a lot of tinkering with shocks and lowering the suspension, putting spacers in your shocks to you know, shrink the truck, get stiffer springs, you know, as stiff as you can get pretty much, to kind of convert it into a road car type suspension action. Now, I am going to, okay, there's some decisions to be made at this point as far as how I'm going to mount things up. So there's our cable for the motor, the sensor cable. Now obviously this one is too short. That is not going to reach from the motor to the speed control, so that can just go back in the box. And that's rubbish. Trash, trash, and trash. I love these in elaborate boxes that people put stuff in. I've had batteries, battery packs show up with, you know, an ornate box, and then it's inside a velveteen drawstring bag, and it's like, did the packaging cost more than the battery? It's like, you know, how about getting rid of the fancy box and the little drawstring bag and knock $4 off the cost of the battery pack for me, okay? That's just me. So, this is our motor. As you can see, this is a nice feature. A lot of motors, the sensor cord comes out straight out the back of the motor as opposed to out the side. So this is kind of neat, that it comes out from the side like that instead of plugging in here and then having to be bent around. So the next question is how am I going to orient this? I'm probably going to want the wires facing up so that I can have as short a run as possible, which means that I may need to run it back a little bit like this so that the sensor cable isn't pinched. See, in this case, the sensor cable coming out the back might not be as inconvenient as having it come out the side on this particular kit. If this were like a pan car where the motor's inside a chassis like that, you know, having the sensor come out the side is a totally different story there. So it may not be a big deal to just kind of twist and angle this right up out of there. I don't want it touching the cage, but yeah, that's going to be fine. That's going to be just fine. I might like wrap a little tape around there to keep that from rubbing against the plastic. We'll see. But yeah, that's going to work fine. Have these straight up here, have the leads go right on back. I'm probably going to solder direct. In other words, if I attach, I'm going to see how much body clearance I have. Wow, that's not exactly convenient either. Okay. Why couldn't they have had all this come out one place? That would have been much better. You see, because we want to mount this like here. It would be more convenient. Oh, I got it. Okay, I'm just going to mount it on this side. I'll put the receiver over here, and I'll run my battery cables. Yeah, okay, that's interesting. They've got those separated there. So the battery cables I'll just run across like this, and that works good instead of having them coming down the side together and bulging the body out. Then these three motor wires can just cross over here and be soldered direct to these tabs. I might use some barrel connectors. No, you know what? I'm not going to do that. Okay, here's what I was just thinking. Let me just explain. In my former days, when I was on a much tighter budget, I used to try to build things so that I could dismantle easily. In other words, I might need to use this speed controller in another car, and so instead of soldering these three leads directly to the motor at an exact length that's going to, you know, not interfere with the body and make a very clean installation, I would cut them midway and put in male and female gold barrel connectors so that I could unplug the speed controller from the motor and move it to some other vehicle. I don't play that anymore. It's not worth it. Anything like that is going to potentially suck some juice away from the system, and I don't want that. So what I'm going to do is make these leads the exact length they need to be, and no more, no less. That might get wrapped around like that around here so it doesn't interfere, because I'm never going to use this speed controller on anything else. I bought it for this car. It's going to stay in this car. It's a permanent resident. If I ever sell this car, I'm going to sell it with the speed controller and motor, and I'm going to you know, if I buy another Formula-1, I'll buy a new motor and speed controller for that new car. Switching things around is a pain in the neck. I mean, when I was a kid and I first started into cars and planes, servos were $60, $70 for a cheap servo. Getting a new receiver was like $150. It was outrageously expensive. You know, motors, things like that were very high priced. Lipos didn't even exist. We were in the NICAD zone back then. And they were also heinously expensive. You know, also now that I'm adult, my economies of scale are different. You know, my disposable income is totally different. So, but, you know, back then I would, you know, have a plane and I would take the servos out of that plane and put them in another plane so I could fly that plane instead. You know, I had one receiver that I moved from plane to car to plane to boat to car to, you know, you see where I'm going. And that was a huge amount of work and a big pain in the neck. And, you know, these days I get what I need. The only thing I might transfer around from one vehicle to another sometimes is a transponder, because those are heinously expensive at $129 a piece. I think I've got 4 of them now. I've kind of been, you know, accumulating. So ultimately I'll probably have one for each car. But you know, that gets expensive. So anyway, that's why I'm going to mount this where I just said. Now, I'm hoping I need to make sure that the body is going to clear that. So I'm going to start by looking at this Biddy design body. And if I were in the beginning of the video, I was, well, hang on a second here. Oh, yeah, tons of space. There'll be almost a ½ inch between the ESC and the edge of the body, if not almost 3/4 of an inch. Yeah, ½ inch, easy, tons of space. So yeah, I'm not going to have any issues with that. The Tamiya body actually has 2 different setups. There's type 1 and type 2. If you recall in the beginning, I was saying that, you know, I really didn't want to use this body right away because I want to have this car ready for this weekend. I want to go race. And there's a lot of pieces that you have to paint separately and cut separately and kind of screw together. You have the type 1 where you bolt these little like pontoons on, or you can just cut the body as it is and use the integrated side pontoons, as they refer to them. Now, one of these is wider than the other, and I don't know which. I would assume that the ones that you attach separately is the wider version, to give you more room for your electronics if you've got a big old speed controller hanging off the side there, which I would hope you don't. But yeah, so that's the option there. I am still going to go ahead with the Biddy design body first, and because I'm going to do a very simple paint job on it, and I will take my time with the Tamiya body and do a much more detailed paint job on it. I do like to do nice paint jobs. If you've seen some of my cars, like the Euro truck has a pretty complicated paint job on it, and the 4-wheel drive truck that I'm working on also is gonna, I've got a pretty complicated design I've already kind of starting to tape out for that. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you like this. In the next videos, I'm going to be attaching the various electronic items, mounting the motor, mounting the ESC, mounting the receiver, things of that nature, and then we're going to get onto things like mounting the body, wings, front and rear, etc.
Please click like and please subscribe to my channel.